Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the talk from Mind the Bleep. Thank you all for coming. I think just waiting on Kirsten, the other speaker, to join, and then we can get going. But I think she'll be just a couple more minutes. Sorry about the delay. Okay, Kirsten's here.
Hello.
Hello. All right. Let's begin then.
Yeah.
So, thanks everyone for coming, and we hope this is a useful lecture for you. Kirsten and I are two Mind the Bleep final year leads, and now we're kind of helping that transition from final year to FY1. So we've prepared a 9 session webinar series on kind of your FY1 survival guide. What do you need to know before starting FY1? What will be helpful to you on the job so that that transition is as seamless as possible, and hopefully there's as few hiccups as possible. Just to introduce ourselves, my name's Eamon. I'm FY1 currently at Newham, and Kirsten, introduce yourself.
Hi. Yeah, I'm an FY1 currently at St George's Hospital.
Nice. So let's begin then. So today we're going to talk a little bit about what Mind the Bleep offers, kind of the timeline for FY1. What does a normal shift pattern look like? What are your responsibilities during FY1, and how best can we prepare to kind of put yourselves in the best position when starting the year? There'll be a lot of other things that we're going to cover in future series and future webinars, such as portfolio, finance, etc. But if you have any questions about any of those things, feel free to ask it now. This session will be as useful for you guys as possible if you ask away as many questions as possible, and chances are you'll have a lot because it's a big change. Also, it's a cliche, but if you have a question, somebody else probably has the same question. So please feel free to pop it in the chat. We'll keep an eye on that and we'll try to answer them as best as possible. At the end, we also have a little clip from the BMA that we'll just play you. We can talk a little bit about strikes at the end as well. So, first of all, congratulations. Med school was a big, big undertaking. 5-6 years of work, exams, placements, sign-offs, and you've done it. So real big congratulations to everyone, and well done for getting through those finals and this 5-6 years. It's an exciting time. Probably many of you have your electives. You'll have probably the biggest summer you'll ever have, and try and enjoy it. Try and have fun now, because life's not as nice when you start working.
So at Mind the Bleep, we have a really wide range of resources, which, given that you've all made it to the webinar today, you are probably familiar with. I just wanted to flag the few important ones that you might find useful in this transition period. So as Eamon said, every Tuesday for the next 9 weeks, including today, we have put together a crash course of everything you hopefully need to know about day one as an F1. So that's all on Medal. So in the same way you registered for this, you can register for those. And there's on the Mind the Bleep website under the Prepare for FY1, I'll put the link in the chat. There are so many blogs that cover absolutely everything you might think of in terms of starting F1, whether that's medical questions about asked to see a patient, refreshing your clinical knowledge, all the way to all the practical stuff we've mentioned so far. So I'll pop a link in the chat box. And also, Something that Mind the Bleep are really proud to provide as well are these in-person, completely free courses that prepare you for being an FY1. So these happen in July on the weekend, and we're currently looking for people to express interest so we can get a gauge on how many people we can run them for. So if you head to the Mind the Bleep website and register your interest, then we can hopefully get a course set up near you and have enough spaces for you all. So I went to this myself last year and I found it so reassuring just to meet other incoming FY1s as well and hear from current F1s and their experience through this period. So this is kind of why Mind the Bleep began, is to help the transition period. So I'll put some links into the chat from all of those, just so you guys are aware and you have resources outside of the webinar series as well.
So, what is the timeline of FY1? I think it's probably important to kind of have a grasp of what it involves, because there's a lot of big changes and a lot of things that you don't really realize what's happening, a lot of deadlines that you might not know when to expect. So in terms of the structure of what happens, typically you'll have 1 to 2 weeks of shadowing. This will be at the end of July, maybe start of August, kind of in that period. And it's very, very trust specific and dependent. So it's kind of hard for me to generalize it, but what it will vary is either you might have a few lectures prior to starting, you might have your induction period where they'll be giving you your cards, etc., and your logins. You may also hopefully get some time to shadow the current FY1s on your ward. This is a really, really useful and actually important period. Try and ask as many questions as possible. Try and ask what are the key things to know from that job. You want to kind of be familiar with how that specific department documents, how they do their ward rounds, how they prescribe. Try and familiarize yourself with the system, the IT system, as much as possible, because ultimately that's going to be what you're going to be spending most of your time on as well. And I know some hospitals have paper notes, some hospitals have IT systems, but generally I think most will have some form of IT, whether it's looking at scans, etc. So try and kind of understand how your specific hospital works. In terms of how easy it is to understand, that can vary hugely, unfortunately. But try and kind of familiarize yourself as best as possible in that period and ask as many questions, because you'd rather ask then when there's someone on hand than when they're all gone and you're kind of left on your own. You'll then have 3 different rotations throughout the year. Rotation 1's from August to December, and then you've got second rotation from start of December to April, and then the last one from April to August. Generally, these will fly by. They actually go pretty fast and much faster than you expect. Again, every rotation will have their little quirks, a little different skills to learn. Try and ask at the start, learning opportunities, what kind of things can you pick up from this rotation, even if you have no interest in it. There's still going to be something that you can take from that rotation. So try and focus on those. The other important thing is, as I've put at the bottom, or as the slide at the bottom, the Horus e-portfolio. So we're going to have a whole webinar on the e-portfolio. It's a pretty important thing, actually something that they don't really tell you about before starting. You kind of have this impression that, finish med school and it's all done. It's not. There are regs even asking for sign-offs. It's quite sad, but also important, I guess, and they do it for a reason. In terms of what it's expected, it might be a little bit similar to what you experienced in medical school. You'll be expected to get your SLEs, so mini KEXs, examinations, etc., and also your CPDs. You'll also have some DOPs which you can sign off. There's no minimum number, and you'll have to, alongside this, also get your teaching, lots of teaching hours. You need to get about 60 teaching hours throughout the year. Half of those need to be core hours, which you need to get from your kind of your weekly teaching, which your medical school offers. We'll go into this a little bit more detail in a later webinar, but that's just a kind of brief overview of what the e-portfolio is. The importance of the e-portfolio is actually this is the only thing that they look at when passing the year, generally, only thing. Obviously, attendance, etc., and serious incidents are important, but generally this is the main thing that they would look at when passing the year. So you need to prove that you've matched all the competencies, and FY1 is required to match by the end, and something called ARCP. ARCP kind of varies. I know for me it's at the start of June, so I've got literally a week and a half before I have to submit my portfolio. Everyone kind of stresses about it at the end, trying to get the last few sign-offs, the last few reflections, etc., and match their competencies. So definitely get on your portfolio nice and early. Your trusts that you'll be working at should hopefully give you more information about this and your inductions, and also deanery specific portfolio requirements as well. For example, some require a QI project, some don't. Okay. The ARCP generally also occurs in the middle of rotation 3, something to be aware of, because whilst you have a good 4 months to get your sign-offs for rotation 1 and rotation 2, in rotation 3 you've only got 2 months. So, and do they expect the same number of sign-offs in half the time? Yes, they do. So, just keep that in mind. Don't leave everything to the last minute, because there actually isn't that much time at the end. Once you've got your ARCP signed off, you can then apply for full GMC registration, and then you're nearly an F2. And the whole cycle repeats itself in F2. So this is what I mean. This kind of portfolio thing is a recurring task that doctors have to do. So it's important to be familiar with it and to also get in good habits nice and early. Don't leave things to the last minute. When you do something, try and get it signed off. Okay? There's even, I think prizes and points at the end for people with the best portfolio. So if you're inclined that way, then feel free to make your portfolio as good as possible. Another thing that probably is important to know is shift pattern examples. So shift patterns can vary greatly depending on which specialty you're on. Often the surgeons will start at 8 a.m. because they have to go to theatre nice and early, and their ward-downs will be much quicker. The medicine lot often will start about 8:30 to 9 a.m. It depends on your hospital, and both will generally finish about 5 p.m. I've heard of some surgical specialties finishing at 4, but it does really vary. Okay, so this is kind of just an example and not necessarily what exactly you will be experiencing. The morning will generally be the ward rounds. I'm sure you'll know from your work, from your placements, and then F1s will be expected to do jobs in the afternoon. Following 5 p.m, that's when most shifts will finish, and then you will get the evening on-call shift. This is where you're generally only going to have a few juniors, and the most senior doctor is probably going to be a registrar covering a pretty large number of wards. This is probably where you'll do most of your learning as an F1, to be honest. It's probably where you'll find yourself most acting most independently, and probably where you might have the least amount of support. Okay, that's not necessarily something to be afraid of. It's a really good learning opportunity, and actually whenever you need something and whenever something is unsafe, there are people on hand to help you out. Okay, so really please don't be afraid of asking for help from your seniors, whether that's an SHO or a registrar. The evening on call will vary between 5 to 9, 5 to 8:30, depends on the hospital. You'll then have an evening handover where you will hand over your jobs, and then the night team will take over from there. They'll work in 12 hours and hand over their jobs in the morning. That's kind of how the shift patterns work. So there'll be kind of 12 hours day team, 12 hours night team. Okay, not every FY1 will be working night shifts, but if you are working night shifts, generally it'll be the full 12 hours. And you'll be handing over your jobs in the morning to the day teams. When you're nearing 5 p.m, about 4:30, just keep in the back of your mind, on-call's happening, I need to start handing over my jobs. What are the serious important things that need to be handed over? Okay? That's often probably more important on Fridays when you've got a whole weekend to kind of plan for. And what I would really try and do is try and get your seniors, your registrars, your consultants to kind of help make weekend plans with you, so that there is some senior leadership and guidance towards what's happening over the weekend, especially at the start. The other important thing is, the job won't wait for you. So make sure you take your breaks, okay? Because there are going to be endless amount of tasks, endless amount of things that you can be doing, and often, you know, that list is endless. So make sure you give yourself some time out because you will work much, much more efficiently if you have done that, okay? If you do find yourself going over, so you find yourself working until 6 o'clock, 6:30. You found yourself being in unsafe positions where you're expected to look after a patient that's super super unwell and there's no senior support. Rare, I wouldn't get too worried about that, but it can happen. There is a system called exception reporting. Okay, what exception reporting is if you've worked overtime, then you can file out a form online, send it to your educational supervisor or your clinical supervisor, and what they will do is they will review the form, and they will either give you time off in lieu. So let's say you've worked 1.5 hours overtime, so you've worked until 6:30, for example. They'll give you 1.5 hours time off in lieu that you can take off at a later date, or they'll pay you for 1.5 hours worth of work. Sometimes you can ask and you can actually say, oh, I'd rather the time off, or I'd rather the money, depending on whichever one you'd rather. Okay. So exception reporting is an important thing to be aware of. I would really, really encourage you all to use it because ultimately we need to protect ourselves. And if there are unsafe practices, this is really the only way that hospitals have evidence that there are unsafe practices happening in their departments. And actually, exception reporting leads to further and to more staffing in the future. So, for example, if a vascular department exception reports loads, then HEE might look at that and say, they need an extra F1, and they might give them an extra F1 later down the line. So I really, really, really recommend exception reporting. The other thing to be aware of is often, towards the later afternoons, you might find yourself a little bit on your own, or there might be reduced senior support as the consultant goes off. Your registrars might be busy. Don't worry if you find yourself with an unwell patient, okay? Assess them, try and get some basic understanding of what's going on, and then just call for help if you need to, okay? Try and assess before calling for help. That's a thing that registrars and seniors generally tend to appreciate as well, okay? But again, don't worry. Everyone has been in your shoes, and there is almost always support available. So, go on, Kirsten.
So I just put this slide in just to give you guys a typical idea of what a shift pattern might look like. So there's very often varying shift patterns, as Eamon's just explained, and they kind of occur in this pattern that give you will work a string of normal days, and then sometimes your on-calls are kind of blocked into one. But as you can see, there's lots of rest days dotted throughout, and you can also see quite clearly the frequency of weekends you might be working. So I'll come on to this later on in the slides, but there's lots of rules, rota rules that protect us against being overworked that I can go through. So it's really important when you receive this document that you go through it really carefully, and that you write down when you're working, because at the beginning it is really confusing to know when you're supposed to be on a long day, when you're supposed to come in early, etc., etc. So I'll go through that.
Okay, so how should you prepare for starting FY1? And what are the kind of things that, would actually help you for the job? The first thing to know is just honestly have fun at this moment in time. Don't go revising your medical knowledge and doing past med with other things. The time for that will come if you need to do it. There will be medical exams that will come up regardless of what medical specialty you have to do. So there are times when you'll need to revise. There are times when you need to prepare for other things. What there won't be is another period this long where you'll have off to kind of literally just enjoy doing whatever you want. Go on holidays, see your friends, just take it off, because once you've started, annual leave can be a little bit tricky to get, and it's never going to be as long a period as this, okay? And we'll talk a little bit more about annual leave in a few slides down the line. So In terms of paperwork, some of you guys might have already had this being sent to you. I hope many of you have already. But there are a number of pre-employment checks that kind of happen prior to starting, okay? So there's the STEP form, there's often an ID check, occupational health, and the DBS check as well. In regards to the DBS check, the trust generally should be paying for that. So, let somebody know if they're not and find out if that's normal for the trust. Occupational health can vary. Sometimes it's in person, sometimes it's online. It often depends on what information you provide. And that can kind of go either way. Try and get these forms done as early as possible, just because there are always a few people that don't, and then this can kind of delay things, and it won't necessarily delay you starting the job, but it can definitely delay getting your IDs, getting your logins, and that is not something that you want to have when you're starting, because you'll be on the back foot at a very early stage. So get your pre-employment checks done nice and early, and you can kind of just forget about them and move on. They are long. I do apologize. They also often do crop up for every time you move trust. So, for example, if you go from F1 to F2 in a different trust, you often have to do the same on pre-employment checks again. The other thing to take note of is the contract. So check your contract for any issues. You can read it yourself. If you're not comfortable or you're not sure, then the BMA contract checker is also very helpful as well. You can literally send it to someone from the BMA and they'll be able to look through it and make sure that it's compliant actually with the junior doctor contract, so the national contract that's been signed, and also various other laws and regulations. So that's important to do. Often at some stage they will ask whether you want to commit to the European Time Directive. Okay, what this is generally the European Time Directive is where you have to work a maximum certain amount of hours, and there should be certain breaks if you work certain periods of time. I think Kirsten will go into that a little bit more detail of what should be required from your contract and from your shift pattern. You can opt out if you want, and what this means is that you're basically saying you're willing to work more than the 48 hours that you're limited to, and this can be in the form of locums or rota. Generally, it won't be in the form of rota. What happens is everyone has a fixed rota line, and that rota line doesn't change. Okay, so I have the same rota as the F1 from the previous year, and they will have the same rota as F1 from their previous year. So your shift pattern won't necessarily change, but it does mean you can work more locums or on calls if that's what you want to do. Typically, I think the advice is actually it can go either way. What I got told, which I thought was quite helpful, was opt in at the start and then opt out later if you want to start picking up locums, just because you probably want to protect yourself at the beginning, make sure you're not working too many hours and not putting too much pressure on you. Once you've kind of found your feet, then you can opt out and do whatever you want. But again, that's not a hard and fast rule, and it can be whatever you'd like to go. The other thing to note is most people don't even get their contracts sent before you start working, okay? So if you haven't got it sent yet, I wouldn't be surprised. I got mine months into the job. A lot of people don't even sign their contracts. And if you don't sign your contract, that means that you default to the National Junior Doctor contract. There are some people that say the National Junior Doctor default contract is better because there's fewer clauses, and often trusts can insert their own clauses. I'm not so sure about what exactly the right thing to do here is. But I think ultimately the decision is yours. If you get a contract, sign it if you want. What I wouldn't do is be too worried if you haven't received anything, because they're inevitably delayed very frequently. Rota and annual leave. So this is probably something that a lot of you will have questions on. Unfortunately, getting time off once you started work is not as easy as it perhaps should, especially in the medical field. There are certain rules that you should follow. And specifically try and get your leave done as soon as possible, as early as possible, and specifically a minimum of 6 weeks prior, okay? The reason being, at the start of a specialty, what will happen is people will put all the annual leave in, a lot of the days will get taken up, and there'll be fewer days left for you to go on leave. The reason being, most wards will have a minimum staffing level, okay? So this is probably an important thing that I would recommend you guys find out nice and early. Ask what is your minimum level of minimum staffing. How many junior doctors does your ward need to run on a normal day? This is important because when you're requesting annual leave, often they may reject days of annual leave if you are going underneath the minimum staffing. So, for example, if a ward requires 2 doctors and there's only 2 of you on, they may say, no, you can't take leave. Okay, and that does happen. Various trusts and various specialties and departments will have different rules on getting locums to replace you if you do want leave, especially if you request more than 6 weeks in advance. But there's no hard and fast rule, and often it really is very hospital and very specialty dependent even. Okay. The other thing to note is many specialties, you're not actually allowed to swap on calls. So you're not allowed to actually take time off or take annual leave when you have an on-call. So let's say I am working a 5 to 9 evening shift on a Thursday and I'm a normal day the rest of the week. I can take the Monday to Wednesday and the Friday off, but the Thursday I can't unless I swap that evening shift, because you can't take time off generally for your on-call shifts. So keep that in mind when you get your rotas, and just be wary that you may need to do some swaps. People generally manage to get the swaps because ultimately everyone's very accepting that we're all in the same boat and do try and help each other out. But just keep that in mind, that there's something you'll need to do when you are asking for leave. You're allowed 9 days of annual leave per rotation, so that's 27 days in total. What generally you can't do, although I think there are a few cases where they've allowed it, but generally you can't move annual leave from one rotation to the other. All 9 days have to be in rotation 1, and then rotation 2, and then rotation 3. You're also given an extra amount of personal development days. This, I think, can vary between 2 to 4. I think the rules have changed. So ask your department and ask your trust and see what they offer. Okay, you should be allowed 2 to 4 development days. It can often be split per rotation. So, okay, so 2 to 4 per rotation. You can often split this how you like. So, for example, if you want to take a few half days off, you can do that. If you want to take a whole day off, you can do that. If you want to take 2 days off per week or whatever, you can do that as well. Okay, so I think every specialty will have their own way of doing it. I'd find out how they want to do it, and if you want it slightly differently, always don't be afraid to ask and see what can happen. Another important thing is time off in lieu, often known as toil. I'd never heard of toil until starting, but you learn about it very quickly. What it is every rotation will have a bank holiday. If you find yourself on call on the bank holiday, ED is a slightly different thing. So if you're on ED, this doesn't really apply. But if you are on a medical job or a surgical job and you find yourself on call on a bank holiday, chances are you're going to be working that bank holiday. If you're on a normal day, chances are you're not. That's, again, not a hard and fast rule. I can't generalize it, but that's generally what happens. What that means is if you are working a bank holiday, you are allowed to get 1 day off, time off in lieu. So actually your annual leave days increase from 9 to 10. If you're working 2 bank holidays, you get 2 days of extra annual leave. And you should be able to take that annual leave as and when you want it. Okay? So the downsides are you're working bank holiday. The upsides are, well, actually you get an extra day of annual leave whenever you want it. So, it can kind of vary. Some people do try and swap out of bank holidays. Some people do try and swap in. Keep that in mind when you get your rotas as well, and when you are applying for annual leave too. But what I would do is I would confirm with your specialty before you kind of start making plans based on that, to see how they approach toil and how their rotas are affected by bank holidays, because ultimately it is very specially dependent. The BMA rota checker is really useful. What this is you can send your rota to the BMA and they will ensure that it fits the criteria as set out by the junior doctor contract. Kirsten will talk about that a little bit later. often it's very, very confusing. You will find yourself working very odd shifts that you think, is this really compliant? And somehow they manage to squeeze it so it just about is. Like I think in our job, we work 7 days in a row, of which 3 days are 13-hour shifts. And that's kind of expected. So with regards, and that is compliant with the rules as well. So don't be surprised if you get something like that. The key thing is if you can use your annual leave to break that up, for example, if you want, or you can block your annual leave altogether and take off large chunks of time off as well. The other thing is confirm your working hours with your department. Sometimes the rota you'll receive won't necessarily have the right working hours, so just make sure that you are getting the right hours. And your rota should not change within less than 6 weeks of notice. Okay, I think that is stipulated in the Dream Doctor contract. So I think it is. But so if it does change, then I would get the BMA involved, or I would at least get your reps involved, because that is something that shouldn't be happening. If it's changing in less than 6 weeks. Okay.
So I've written the list of rules here just to bear in mind when you do receive your work schedule. This is just taken from rota rules at a glance on the BMA website. But I thought I'd just chat through them really quickly to give you a rough idea of what to expect. So if you do look at it, you can kind of get a sense of what's right and what's wrong. So you shouldn't work more than 48 hours average per week. So you might have a really busy on-call week where you're working 50 plus hours, but the next week should be super light in terms of the hours you're working. So it kind of cycles, and you might have normal kind of standard 9 to 5 40-hour weeks kind of sandwiched between, but the average across should be 48. So unfortunately you do work over that some weeks, but it should be compensated. Next thing to say is you should only work 72 hours of work in 168 hours. So in 7 days straight, you should not work more than 72 hours. I don't think this is super common. This is quite a lot of work. So I've not come across this personally, but that's the complete maximum number if we're talking about hours per week. Rest breaks you should be entitled to, and you should take yourself proactively. No one's going to tell you to go on a rest break. No one's going to know how long you've gone for, so make sure you claim your rest breaks yourself. Long days should never be more than 13 hours long. So for example, you might start at 8:30, you must finish at 9:30. You can't work longer than that. You must only have 4 long days in a row. You can have 5, but the trust needs to ask you if you're happy with 5. They can't just assume you're happy with 5. So the maximum they're allowed to give you is 4 long days in a row. And you should have 28 hours of rest after that. And similarly, you can only work maximum 4 night shifts in a row. You can't work more than 4 nights unless, again, you agree. And then a really important thing to note is that you have to have 46 hours, so almost 2 days, worth of rest after any night. So even if they schedule you 1 night, you must have 46 hours or 2 days rest afterwards in order for you to take a day to adjust your sleep cycle and take a day to actually rest. So that's really important, and sometimes that gets missed. So that's one to look out for. And again, if you can't work for more than 7 days straight. So you could work up to 7 days, as Eamon has said, but you can't work 8 days in a row or 9 days in a row. And again, you need to have 2 days rest after a long stretch of working. And between each shift, you should have at least 11 hours. So take a look at when your long days finish and when your normal day or early days start. Do you have 11 hours rest in between? And then finally, frequency of weekends. So when you get your schedule, you can see how many weekends you've been allocated. So they say the trust should aim for max. So the actual legal maximum is 1 and 2, but all trusts say that you should really have a maximum 1 in 3 in terms of frequency. Only very rarely does it go down to 1 in 2. So just these are the things to bear in mind to make sure that your rota is correct. Sometimes they do make mistakes, and you obviously want to protect yourself because there are reasons these rules exist. It's to help prevent our burnout. Got a question in the comments saying, do these rota rules apply for Scotland? I believe this is the England and Wales junior doctor contract. They're probably very similar, but I think Scotland have a different junior doctor contract, so it's worth having a look online as well. You probably find a very similar article. But yeah, these are just important things to bear in mind, especially if you're like swapping shifts around, that you're not breaching any of these rules.
Yeah, I think just something that I've heard I was talking to someone from Scotland last weekend actually, and he works 1 in 2 weekends. I think generally Scottish rotas are a little bit more intense, but you get paid a lot more. So yeah, but I think there are slightly different rules for Scotland. I'm not so sure on that though. Cool. So equipment that is useful for starting F1. A stethoscope. Ultimately, it can be the same one that you use in medical school. Some people buy some new ones. Ultimately, it doesn't really matter, to be honest. If you're want to be a medical registrar and stuff, then go for it. Otherwise, I think your normal Littman should work fine. Pens, have loads and loads and loads of pens. Be prepared to lose pens. Be prepared for people to ask for your pen and not give it back. Yeah, have lots of pens. Another really important thing is often you'll have multiple ID cards, okay? So you'll have a smart card, which lets you log into the NHS system, and then you also have your ID card, which will get you all in and around all the different rooms of the hospital. In terms of getting around with the hospital, your ID card, just to make sure at the start that it gets you into all the main places. Sometimes it doesn't, and often then you'll need to go to the ID card manager, whoever that may be. It can be security, it can be the front desk, etc. And they'll need to kind of get you access to where you don't, because what you don't want to happen is you're covering the cardiac arrest bleep or the medical emergency bleep, and there's a call and you can't access the ward and you're waiting for a nurse to let you in. So it's, not ideal. Make sure you've got access everywhere. Get your meal prep stuff done nice and early, your food containers, your water bottles, try and meal prep if possible. Often the canteens, it depends where actually, but I mean, my local canteens are super expensive. It's like £6.50 for a meal. And it's not very healthy. So, look after yourself. Often you'll see people walking out with a pack of crisps and a Yorkie and water and like a Fanta, and that's their lunch. Try and, look after your health. Okay. Because ultimately, if you don't look after yourself, you can't look after others. A few other bits and bobs. I think probably the important thing is shoes. Really, really get comfortable shoes, because you're standing up a lot. It depends on the job, but generally you're standing up a lot. You're doing long ward rounds and you're going from patient to patient. You're not being able to sit down. Having comfortable shoes is super, super important. You might get back pain or aches and breaks, etc. So have nice shoes to wear.
Cool. So I'm going to cover some of the practical aspects as well. So I'm sure at this point, a lot of you will be moving to a new city, somewhere you might be familiar with, somewhere you might not be familiar with. And that's a very common theme. I think a lot of F1s move to new areas, and there's some kind of camaraderie in that, is that people are very willing to make friends in new areas. So it's not as daunting once you arrive. So for those that are moving to an area that they don't know, they don't really have a big support network. Join the, well, first of all, talk to your friends at your current medical school, see who's going to which deanery and try kind of speak to them. What are their plans? Are they also looking for flatmates? Otherwise, we had lots of deanery WhatsApp chats and Facebook group chats, and people put up spreadsheets of kind of areas in which they were looking, if they were looking for flatmates, etc. So that is a really useful way. that people found flatmates. Otherwise, you can always consider spareroom.com or hospital accommodation to find accommodation options. And I would recommend to aim to move before induction. So just bear in mind that you'll be starting going to work a week before your contract starts in August. So try and move by the end of July, so you're not having to think about that whilst starting a new job, because it can be quite a lot to juggle. Things to bear in mind and flag about moving house is that it's obviously expensive. There's lots of costs associated with it. Each trust is different and can help you with relocation expenses, which I don't think many people are aware of. So things like hiring a van to move your stuff, the hospital can help pay for that for you. But again, this is trust specific, so check with your hospital what they are able to help you with. And the second thing is, when we were all looking for where to live in regards to work, best to check the commute options. So if you do drive and are able to drive, what's that drive like? Is it very busy with traffic in the mornings and in rush hour? Are you going to be able to get to work on time? Secondly, is it a long drive? For example, after a long shift or a night shift, is it going to be safe to drive for that amount of time? Do you feel that you're a confident enough driver to do that? And also, how long do you want to be commuting for every day? So bearing in mind, obviously, it's every single day and sometimes at quite antisocial hours. How long are you realistically willing to commute for that it won't impact your quality of life? And the other thing is, if you're kind of in a city, think about the public transport options. So it's not necessarily all about distance. So you can plug kind of all regions of the area into Google Maps and then put your hospital in. And then I just kind of went with whichever had the best transport links, because then it just gets you to work on time. So yeah, think about things that aren't affected by traffic as well. So if some people cycle, I take the tube to work. Trains are quite reliable as well, versus driving. So just bear that in mind. And then other things are thinking about where in the new city or town you want to live in. There is life outside of work. So think about your hobbies, what you like to do in your spare time, where are the local gyms, just practically like where's the nearest supermarket, just to get yourself set up. What's the kind of type of area do you want to live in? Somewhere busy, somewhere quiet. So it's worth kind of, if you haven't started thinking about that already, thinking about that now and chatting to the people around you. So you can try team up, and hopefully the whole thing will be less daunting once you've got like a flatmate or two, or if you want to live by your own, then obviously that's great too. I'm just gonna switch slides. So there's lots of different apps that are really useful as a junior doctor to have, and there's no shame in looking up information on the job. We can't possibly remember everything. There's so much kind of neat, like detail to remember. So the first kind of few apps are the absolute essentials, the first four. So Switch, or sometimes it's called Induction, but I think the latest version is called Accurate Switch. This is a directory. It's like an address book for everyone you need to contact in the hospital. So it's got everybody's extension numbers and everybody's bleep numbers. So if you want to contact the cardiology reg, their number's in there, the app. If you want to contact CT, numbers in the app. So you can't go a day without using this app working in a hospital. So this is an essential. Second one is MD Calc. This is really good for calculating things quickly. So very common things are like calculating EGFRs or calculating scores like Wells scores, for example. It just helps you kind of quickly do it on your phone, which helps guide kind of prescribing and treatment management. Thirdly is Microguide. Again, really, really helpful. Every trust has different antibiotic stewardship policies and antibiotic of choice. And no matter how familiar you are or confident you can remember it from exams, it changes all the time and it's different everywhere you go. So you almost always look up empiric antibiotic treatment in Microguide before you've got cultures. So that's great. BNF and BNFC for children, really useful for looking up doses and kind of when things change in renal impairment or liver impairment. Again, you'll use this really regularly. Doses change all the time, if depending on the patient. So it's actually good practice to look up the dose, even if you think you know it, just in case there's a contraindication or kind of renal liver impairment that might affect the dose. Good. So those are the 4 that I would say you definitely need to have on your phone. And then the others are just super useful. So Buku medicine is, it has other things on it, but it's most useful for hematological conditions. So when you look at someone's bloods and they've got a low neutrophil count or low platelet count, I think hematology is probably most people's weaker area. So it's got really good guidance of the first kind of initial investigations and management steps that you can initiate yourself as an F1. Then you've got ToxBase, so you should be able to access this for free through your trust. This will really help you in, for example, acute medicine or ED, where you see a patient with a known overdose and you can look for advice on how to manage that. The next 2 are kind of like junior doctor pocket handbooks. So Smart Doctor so these are both paid apps. They cost, I think, maybe £2, £3, so about a cup of coffee. And they basically talk you through how to manage some of the most common bleeps that you'll get. So what happens when someone's got high resp rate or high heart rate or low heart rate, or they're low saturating. So really common kind of clinical like presentations you'll see. And then also the Foundation Doctor Handbook's got more of that as well. And it includes also like a guidance on how to approach a patient with chest pain, approach a patient with shortness of breath, treating acute asthma. So that's just really useful just to look up when you're on your on-calls and you just need a bit of a refresher. And then the last 2 are useful for when you're on call doing your cardiac arrest scenarios. So iResus is made by the Resuscitation Council UK, and it's got all your algorithms on it. So your ALS algorithm, so what happens in a cardiac arrest, but also other emergencies such as anaphylaxis. So again, in the heat of the moment, when the pressure's high and there's lots of adrenaline, best thing to do is just open the app, look at the algorithm, make sure you're not missing anything. And then the last app's called iArrest. And this is really useful because often as an F1 at a cardiac arrest, one of your jobs might be to scribe or to keep timings. So this app helps you do that. It runs a timer and then you can kind of write down what's happening. So that's a really useful kind of guide if you're scribing in an arrest. Cool. So I think we touched upon this a little bit before, but I just thought I'd make a kind of a list about what would be useful to do now. So I guess a lot of you will be doing shadowing and assistantships as your last block as a final year student. And these are the things that I think would be useful to at least familiarize yourself with and try to learn how to do before you start. So have a go at these things yourself. I find for me it's really useful to actually do it rather than just watch someone do it. So, for example, ward round documentation, how do you even make a note in the system? How do you title it? And then looking at the structure of ward round documentation. We'll have a session on this a bit later on in the series. Then make sure that you're comfortable with practical skills. So these are all very common things you'll do as an F1. So bloods, cannulas, arterial blood gases, urinary catheters. Make sure you're comfortable how to do that. If you don't know, just ask. It's best to learn whilst you're a student before you become an F1 and it's an expectation that you know how to do it. Go through the motions of doing a full clerking. So take the history, do the examination, think of the initial management plan, and then talk through it with the FY1 on your ward, see what they would have done different. Just have a go at being that independent doctor that sees a patient. And similarly, do an A2E assessment, go to an unwell patient, and then hand over practicing your S-bar technique to a junior doctor. Because at the end of the day, you will be the person doing this. And then also a large part of our job is prescribing. So if you've got an electronic system, learn how to prescribe electronically and ask your F1 what are the common pitfalls or what bits for example, in terms of dosing to be careful on, or if you have a paper drug chart, your hospital's paper notes, ask to have everyone has backup paper charts anyway, even if your hospital is electronic, just to have a go at writing it out. And then familiarize yourself with pain relief, laxatives, antiemetics. These are kind of your basic bread and butter prescriptions that you can initiate yourself as an F1, amongst lots of other things. Number 6 is a fluid balance assessment. This is really common to be asked to go and do, so make sure you know how to do a top-to-toe fluid balance assessment. And then for the patients on the wards, a lot of your day-to-day jobs are kind of looking at bloods, trying to make jobs happen, like putting in referrals, making phone calls to specialists, getting scans arranged. Ask the F1 on your ward if you can have a go doing that. So volunteer to call the radiologist and offer to try sell the story. Why does my patient need a scan? Because these are really important skills that you need to learn as an F1. Or, for example, if you need to seek a specialist opinion, have a go. So call the respiratory reg, ask them for their advice, ask them to come and see the patient, have a go at those difficult phone calls. Because whilst you can do it supported by an F1, it's best to kind of familiarise yourself before you then are launched at actually doing it yourself all the time. Similarly, you will hold bleeps as an F1, and it's a really good opportunity to try and answer those bleeps. So volunteer to maybe hold the bleep for an hour on placement, then you can see the kind of variety of bleeps you might get when you do become an F1. Obviously, some of it, if you're not familiar with the patients, you might not be able to answer all the questions, and that's completely fine, but at least you've heard what the questions are, and that I think is really helpful. And then the last thing is, if you're on a surgical specialty, make sure you're comfortable with scrubbing, gowning and gloving in theatre, just because you might have to go to theatre sometimes, either for your own interest and for learning or to help. So yeah, that's the kind of minimum that you should kind of at least be familiar with before you start. So obviously you've got time now, and you've got the couple of days before you start to kind of ask your F1 to help you familiarise yourself with all these things. Great. So just before we do a Q&A, I've just got a 5-minute video from the BMA that I'm going to share with you. So things like the BMA contract checker and the BMA rota checker, they're all kind of really useful tools, but they are only available for members. So they've shared with us a short video, it's 5 minutes, that I'm going to play to you now on how you can sign up, and they've got a deal on at the moment that you can get a £10 Amazon voucher. You able to see the video?
No.
What about now?
Hi everybody, Dan from the BMA here. I'm going to talk today about the BMA and how it can help in particular with your F1. So firstly, membership of the BMA has never been as important as it is right now, and as an exclusive for Mind the Beep, you get £10 Amazon voucher if you join today using the QR code on the screen. Membership for 5 years is £3.75 a month, and this rate carries through until August. The £10 Amazon voucher essentially pays you back until then. You can use all of the F1 membership benefits right away, of course, like our contract and route checker. So do take advantage of this offer if you're not already a member. You just need to make sure that you drop me an email after you've registered with your new BMA ID, and I'll get the voucher over to you. This isn't available on our website, so do make sure you use that QR code only, and remember to send me an email after for your voucher. Membership from August onwards is around £8 a month after tax relief, and of course you can cancel anytime. I'm sure you know what the BMA is and what it does generally, but as a bit of a reminder, we are your trade union and professional association. We sometimes get some confusion with indemnity companies, so MDU, MPS, but the fact is we do something different to those companies. They deal with the clinical side of things, insurance, patient complaints, whereas we deal with the non-clinical side of things, so things like your pay, your entitlements, and your support work. Most doctors are members of the BMA with membership at nearly 200,000 doctors and med students nationwide, and it's worth remembering that we only deal with doctors and medical students. So the big issue at the moment, of course, is your pay, and we need you guys coming through into F1 to continue the fight. Your cohort, of course, stands to gain the most from this, so please do join the BMA and continue alongside the current juniors in fighting for better pay. So this is where we are at the moment. Things are working despite us not agreeing to any particular offers. The government keeps saying this is the final offer, and we've seen another increase. So we've done incredibly well without entertaining any offers, but it's important that we keep going and we stick together. So to continue our mandate to strike, we held another reballot back in April, and these were the results. So we now have a mandate to strike through till the 19th of September. So this obviously includes you guys. If you were to start, it's in August, and we call a strike, you guys would now be able to strike your membership. So just a bit of an update in terms of where we are at the moment, in terms of pay and strikes. There's no planned strike dates as yet. As things stand, while mediated talks with the government over 23-24 pay continues. You may have seen an email that came out last week about this. The DDRB, of course, will give recommendations coming on to the 24-25 year, and the result of the current talks will, of course, affect that. It's worth saying any payoff which will affect you will be put to you as members. Nothing will be accepted unless it's been voted upon by us as a whole. So another important reason to be in membership and have your say. Also, if we do find ourselves on strike in August, September, and beyond, you'll only have protection from the BMA if you're in membership. So just to step outside the pay dispute for now, there's lots of things that we can help you with during your F1. Some of the frequently asked questions we get on the screen. We have BMA staff on the ground at each trust who know inside out, so we'll always be able to help you, and we usually resolve things pretty quickly. It's not uncommon, sadly, in the NHS as a support call to go to if needed, and you can get in touch with us anytime via our website, and you'll be put in touch with your local BMA staff if further support and help is needed. So this is possibly the most important slide from me today, so please, if nothing else, do remember to take this information away with you. As a member, we can check your contract for free before you sign it, but you must remember to send it to us. It usually comes as a PDF, so you can just forward it over to us. 25% of the contracts we checked last year were wrong in some way. It's often around pay. So please do send it to us and make sure it's correct, so we can make sure it's correct before you sign it. And if you do forget and you sign it and then remember to send it to us, we can still check it and sort it out if it's been given to you as it was given to you wrongly. But obviously it's much easier if you haven't signed it yet. We negotiated this contract so we know exactly what should be in it, and we have a team that checks them around the clock. And if there are any issues, we can help get them resolved for you, so you're not missing out on anything in terms of entitlements or pay. We also have a rota checking tool, so you can be sure that your rota is correct. So with that one, you go in online and enter your rota yourself, and it flags up to us if it's wrong. Other resources you get as part of BMA membership include access to the BMA library, which offers you thousands of ebooks and journals. You also have full access to Clinical Key, which you may have used during medical school, so there's no paywalls there, you just get complete access to that. We run a series of webinars as well, which may be useful to you. You can watch those live or watch them back online as they're recorded. You've also got full access to BMJ Learning, and you'll get a copy of the BMJ through the post. If you're already in membership and you're not getting your BMJ, please do get in touch with us, and we'll make sure that it starts getting sent out to you every week. We've got a great tool for exploring your specialty options. So it's an online psychometric test, which takes about 20 minutes to complete. It'll ask all sorts of work-life balance questions, and then at the end, it'll give you a breakdown of what specialties will suit you according to the answer you've given. Good to do it now, and then sort of a couple of months into F1, and then start thinking about what specialties you want to go into. So this can help you really make a good decision when it comes to that. So that's it from me. Thanks a lot for listening. Like I said at the start, very important to be in membership, especially now for a multitude of reasons. Not only obviously pay restoration and the strikes, but also voting on any offers that come out, and also getting your contract and rota checked, and just having general support from us while you start your F1. So please do take advantage of the offer on the screen if you're not already in membership. Use that QR code, join, and then drop me an email, and I'll make sure that you get £10 Amazon voucher sent out. Like I said at the start, this is exclusive to Mind the Belief, so you won't find this online. So do make the most of this. Thank you.
Great. So that's a short message from the BMA, and you get a £10 voucher, and it's basically £3-ish for the next 3 months. So it kind of, you break even until you start earning, which is great. So we just pop the last slide back on, Eamon, if possible, because it's just got the QR code for feedback and also a QR code to sign up for next Tuesday's webinar, where we've got a first session, which will be going through managing medical on-calls when you're asked to see a patient. So we'll leave that up for you, and then me and Eamon will stick around for a couple of minutes if anyone wants to put their questions, any final questions in the chat, and we can talk through them. But otherwise, we hope you found this session helpful and tried to relieve some of the worries about the practical aspects of starting F1. And we hope you find the series useful as well.
Yeah, please don't be shy. If you have any questions, pop in the chat. I've also popped the feedback link in the chat as well, so please complete that for us. We do listen. We do act upon it.
Let us know if there's any specific sessions you want us to run. We've kind of created a rough webinar timetable that you might have seen circulating around, but we're always open to taking on extra topics on board. Just got a question from Amelia. Regarding toil again, is it true we can only request that day off once that specific bank holiday has passed, or is that trust dependent? In my experience, I've requested it before the bank holiday has passed. I've seen that I'm working a bank holiday. So I've said, look, I'm working, say, for example, next bank holiday Monday. Please, can I have this day off in July? And that's been fine. But again, check with your local, not just trust, but with your local specialty and ward. Things kind of vary, but usually, I mean, it's not going to change whether you work back. You will work that bank holiday. That won't change. So you should be able to request your toil ahead of time.
Yeah, I agree. Same process in my hospital, to be honest. I've seen it where a few people sometimes their toil they can't, where they can't take the day off until after that toil. But they can definitely request it beforehand. So it is slightly department dependent. And I have seen it where a bank holiday came at the end of a shift, end of a placement. So for example, the end of placement 2, and they were able to take that day off actually in placement 3. Whilst, for me in all my jobs, if I've had a toil, I've been able to take it off whenever, before, after, request it whenever. So slightly varies, but I think majority you can take it off whenever.
Yeah, great. Yeah, just want to add as well that you do actually get a lot more time off than I expected anyway. You do work long hours and you do work weekends, but you are compensated quite well with whole days off during the week. If you do work a weekend, for example, or multiple rest days. So there are ups and downs, obviously. And the only annoying thing is you can't control really when your on-calls are. But again, join your WhatsApp groups within your local hospital. There's always people willing to help you out.
Yeah. Like if you were working, like for us, we work 7 days in a row, and then we'll get like Monday, Tuesday off. And then you're working Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. So if you take Wednesday, Thursday, Friday's annual leave, 3 days annual leave actually gets you a whole week.
Yeah.
That's nice.
Yeah, especially after night shifts, you get a lot of what we call 0 days. And I just wanted to highlight, someone said and asked in the chat, what happens if my rest day or 0 day falls on a bank holiday? So for example, you work Saturday, Sunday, and you've got the Monday off, because that's what would happen naturally. Then you get that bank holiday toil as well. So even though you've not been to work on a bank holiday, you've had a rest day on a bank holiday. So you're entitled to that anyway. So then you get an extra day. So that's really important not to miss, because a lot of people have 0 days that fall on bank holidays and don't claim those ones. Equally, if there's a teaching day that falls on your 0 day, claim that back. Teaching day is a work day, so you should be able to claim that another time.
Yeah. Probably another point maybe worth mentioning, which we didn't mention, is ALS, maybe. In terms of ALS, some deaneries, it's now no longer compulsory as per FY1 requirements. So some deaneries will book it for you, some deaneries won't. It really does vary. I know, for example, my deanery, they initially said they're not, and then we kind of made a little bit of a fuss about it, and then they gave us sessions that we can book, so it wasn't compulsory, but they did pay for us in the end. Whilst for others, you have to do it. So it does vary a little bit. But that's probably a recent change as well. It's a really good course. I would really recommend doing it if you can. Diana, in terms of how can I get the certificate? In terms of the certificate from today's session?
Yeah, we should. There are definitely ways to issue certificates. So I think when you do your feedback, there might be an option to select a request for a certificate.
Yeah.
Cool. Any other questions before we leave you to enjoy the rest of your evening? Okay, well, thanks so much everyone for joining, and hopefully see you next Tuesday. Cheers, bye.
Yeah.